Welcome to What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. This week, residents in Texas are reeling as the devastating Smokehouse Creek wildfire continues to rip through the panhandle and parts of Oklahoma. So far, only 37% of the fire is contained. Resources are pouring into the area, but it's already taken a massive toll on one of the state's largest industries, agriculture. Reporting from Nexstar Nation's KXAN in Austin is Texas Bureau reporter Ryan Chandler.
A desperate stampede, turning to a charred field of cattle that couldn't escape.
I've spent the last 15 years building this cow herd up.
Chance Bowers fears he lost as many as 200 cows at about $3,000 a head. That can be a debilitating financial strain.
You can lose it overnight, but we've been very blessed and very fortunate that we've only gonna lose 200, you know.
Thousands more cattle are feared dead across the region. Those who survived left with no water to drink or fields to graze. Many too badly burned to keep.
Their hooves are burned, beyond repair. Their udders are gone, so they'll no longer be able to nurse their calves. It's a real sad situation.
Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller is urging Texans to donate to the State of Texas Agriculture Relief Fund, the state's privately funded lifeline for one of our hardest industries.
The two highest occupations for suicide in the United States are veterans and farmers. And farmers are number one. People up in this country have missed 2 cotton crops in a row. So they're already struggling financially. Now, possibly they've lost all their livestock.
Ranchers in need are getting support from their neighbors in the Panhandle and across Texas. Volunteers bringing in hay to feed surviving animals amid the scorched grazing land.
Anytime I get the chance to help out there, I'd love to come help.
Ryan Chandler, KXAN News.
And on the ground now is reporter Mya Clark from Nexstar Nation's KAMR in Amarillo, Texas. Mya, thanks so much for joining us. You're in Hutchinson County, Texas, where the wildfire is still raging. What's the latest on containment?
Julia, today the Windy Deuce fire is still over 144,000 acres and is 81% contained as of this morning. The Smokehouse Creek fire, that's also the largest fire in the state of Texas history now, is 1,072,000 acres and 44% contained. Firefighters continue to mop up the areas and work on really containing the area and also strengthening their containment structures that they've put in place so that the fire does not spread any further than it already has.
How devastating has this been for people directly affected outside of those situations you just mentioned, including, people with homes, their farms, and their businesses?
So in Hemphill County, which is right next to Hutchinson County where we're at, 112 dwellings were destroyed and 47 families were displaced. And for Hutchinson County, where we're currently at, the current number of homes that have been destroyed isn't exactly sure right now, but we are currently in the Mesa Village area, and there are dozens of homes along this street that have been destroyed. You see over there that someone's car has been completely damaged in this fire, and so people are really just starting to return home now and pick up the pieces. And so another problem that people are facing are the health conditions, because some people, the air quality hasn't been great here, and so people are having difficulty breathing. And as you mentioned, this is a big agriculture area, and so people have lost much of their cattle. There are some people who start off with 10,000 cattle, and now it's down to 20. The feed that they had to feed their cattle is also lost, and so they're needing not only to replace their cattle, but to also replace the food and the fencing that helped protect their farms and ranches.
So, Mya, is there any hope in sight? What are you hearing from officials on an eventual end to this raging fire?
So right now from officials, what we're hearing is that the most dangerous part of the fire is over as wind conditions start to dwindle down again. And also with the cold front that we're experiencing, that's also helping contain the fires and get them completely out. But the Hutchinson County Emergency Management Liaison, Deidre Thomas, said that it could take up to 2 weeks for some of these fires to completely cool down. And so as people return to their homes, they're being encouraged to fill out those insurance claims as quickly as they possibly can and fill out the ISTAT forms as well, because they have about 30 days to report that damage. But another problem that people are facing here is that many of these homes are uninsured. And so their insurance companies aren't going to come in and help them. And so what they're trying to do at the local level is bring in as many resources as they can, whether it's the Texas insurance companies or whether it's just nonprofits that are willing to help with these, and really make sure that people are able to start recovering and bringing in and centralizing those resources in the areas that have been most impacted.
Mya Clark reporting from Hutchinson County, Texas. Thank you so much, and please stay safe out there.
Julia, thank you.
Joining us now, environmental justice attorney and executive director of the Energy Justice Law and Policy Center, Raya Salter. Thank you so much for being here. To jump right into it, you lived in Hawaii, where a devastating wildfire ripped through the island of Maui last year. Just before that, so much of North America, including here in D.C. and New York, were affected by the Canadian wildfires, and we've just been talking about the situation in Texas. Are you surprised to see this level of devastation, and how is climate change contributing to these fires?
No, sadly, I'm not surprised. And we can expect more and more of these extreme weather events as we fail to tackle the climate crisis. Climate change absolutely was a factor in Maui. And in other places, what you see is in Hawaii, you saw native plants that non-native plants that got increasingly dry, and then with increasingly high temperatures, increase that wildfire risk. And that idea of increasing the length of wildfire seasons and having more tinderous trees and plants is exactly what is exacerbating these wildfires, and it is indeed being driven by the climate crisis.
Yeah, so my team came across this study from the Hamburg Institute of International Economics, and essentially the study showed that disasters like these in Texas, Hawaii, et cetera, help awareness in the short term or increase that awareness, but they don't usually lead to impactful change. How do we get people to move from anxiety to action?
That's exactly right. And it's extremely important. Key to it, I think, is not being so doom and gloom about it, in that there are things that we can do substantively to stop this from happening, from making the effects less worse. We know there are some impacts of the climate crisis that are already here and we're not going back. But we can do something about this. If we act now, we can stop the worst of the effects. So I think that's part of the message, is that we can be optimistic because we can do this together.
Absolutely, and there's obviously so much doom and gloom in this news cycle, so it's great to get that more optimistic perspective from you. But I want to say on a similar note, a new poll from the Department of Health, Bloomberg, and Johns Hopkins says that nearly 2/3 of Americans say they don't frequently discuss climate change, and that those that do mostly discuss its impacts on weather. Aside from weather, what are the other ways climate change is really impacting Americans?
One of the big two ways are your health and your wallet. One, the wildfire smoke, in addition to pollution and co-pollutants from power plants and other dirty burning of fossil fuels, among other things, they harm our health. So if you live near the power plant, you have bad air quality that causes asthma, that impacts your entire life, how you can attend school, etc. One is just your pocketbook, right? Our energy bills are too high because we're dependent on these fossil fuels, and there's a lot of risk around fossil fuels that we can't control. We need to move to more reliable, more affordable types of energy, so it doesn't cost so much.
There's so many, different effects. And, last year during the Canadian wildfires, I had never, breathed in that smoke or really been exposed to that. It was, eye-opening to see that impact on my health and those around me. On a different note, though, we hear a lot about something called last chance tourism. And this is where people travel to places threatened by climate change before it's too late. How does that result in more positive change and awareness?
Well, we are losing some of our most precious and spectacular natural resources and places. In particular, Pacific Islands, places in the Arctic, these are under threat. A lot of it's already happened, right? Look what's happened to our coral reefs. There's been so much bleaching. There's so many changes that are happening. So while I understand why people want to see these places, we have to be careful of the impact this tourism also has on these places. And we need to think again more about how can we actually address the root causes and stop this from happening. It's not just about fun and tourism. It's about wildlife. It's about people who live in these areas and their livelihoods and cultures.
I want to go back to the doom and gloom topic. You've said people tend to worry less about that doom and gloom we were talking about. That's 50 years away, and care more about the immediate concerns, how it's affecting them in the here and now. But why do you think people should be more concerned about the long-term effects?
Look, it is really, we really have to think about both. I mean, I understand that it's distressing to think about these long-term existential threats, but we have to be thinking about what's going to happen to our children, our grandchildren. What are we leaving for future generations? And if we don't act now, we're going to be leaving a world that is increasingly unstable, less livable, and won't have the type of lifestyles that I think we want for our children and the natural world, the preservation of the natural world. So these things are really important. But we also have to think about what can we do right now to address them.
Absolutely. You got to live in the present first. Raya Salter, thank you so much for your expertise.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much.
Recently, I met with a bipartisan group of young environmental activists in Los Angeles at an event sponsored by the University of Southern California's Schwarzenegger Institute, the American Conservation Coalition, which is a conservative group, and Brown Girl Green, a progressive media platform. At the event, young conservative and progressive activists were joined by former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger as they gathered to discuss where they can find common ground on environmental issues. Here are some of the highlights.
Republican or Democrat, we will vote you out if you're not committed to those policies.
Any way you want to slice it, from a business standpoint to a government standpoint to just a personal everyday living and dying standpoint, we need smarter solutions on climate change.
The solutions can't be worse than the problem.
If we can get rid of pollution, then we don't have to worry about climate change.
That's right.
So pollution is really the evil.
When living next to an active oil and gas well, you can't open your windows in fear of letting more emissions come inside of your house. You can't go outside and play with your friends because going outside can trigger an asthma attack.
Actually, we do all want the same thing. We want to breathe clean air. We want to drink clean water. We want to be able to power our homes affordably.
We disagree on things. We might even disagree on a lot of things, but I think that was exactly something that shows where there is common ground.
When I go up to Capitol Hill in Washington and I met with Republican environmentalists, the interesting thing was that some of them didn't believe in climate change.
With older politicians, they try to really market the same messages that worked for them 40 years ago. It's like the year's 2024.
Young people are showing up. We are showing up their activism and advocacy, but we don't have the resources or the support necessarily to push our initiatives forward.
If we can just bring communities into the fold and meet them where they're at, that's just something really special.
We're not waiting for permission to lead. We've been told as a generation for far too long that we're too young, we're too inexperienced, we're too naive, but we're not waiting and we're charging ahead.
If we can agree on that kind of basic principle, that we reframe this as an opportunity, then I think people can buy into that vision.
This is the decisive decade and the most critical point to act, and we all have a stake in this game.
And here from both sides of the aisle are youth activist Isabel Brown, author and conservative media influencer, and on the progressive side, Kristy Drutman, founder of Brown Girl Green. Ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. Your politics may be different, but you discovered through this event in LA that you actually have a lot in common when it comes to climate concerns. Did that surprise either of you? Kristy, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of discussion around the need for climate action, but I think a lot of times that can get politicized as only one side of the political aisle, and it was refreshing to see that there are young people that have opposing political views to me that care about these issues and are trying to advocate in their own lane and advocacy and communities that they're a part of. I felt like that was refreshing and interesting and gave me some glimpse of hope that there might be possibilities to bridge gaps and be able to have, deeper conversations.
And Isabel, what was your take?
Surprisingly, Julia, I wasn't very shocked by our common answers and common values there and wanting to protect our nation's most beautiful places and the world at large. Environmentalism is really a generational value of Gen Z and millennials as well. And we're really passionate about caring for the great outdoors, innovating new energy solutions, protecting public lands, and more. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for dialogue and common ground on this issue, but that's true of many, many other seemingly partisan political issues, I think, going into the 2024 election as well.
So, Kristy, what are people your age most worried about when it comes to their respective futures?
I think the biggest thing is a crumbling democracy and also a crumbling environment, especially as climate change continues to threaten the places we love and the communities we care about. I think young people just don't know what the future looks like and are losing hope in, leadership right now to actually be able to do the actions necessary to build the world we want to see. So a lot of young people are concerned about, feeling this lack of confidence in who's leading our country today to really take action on climate change and other, human rights and social issues at the extent that they need to be.
And it seems like a lot of those young people are very interested in advocacy so they can make a difference. So, Isabel, what's your message to young people about advocacy and getting involved?
Don't wait for permission to embrace opportunities for leadership. What I love about our generation so much is that we feel this sense of urgency to serve our communities and build a better future for everybody moving forward. And we do feel a bit disenfranchised and losing public opinion by the systems that are currently in place because, let's face it, most of the people in Washington, D.C. have been there for longer than twice the time we've been alive, making the same promises every 2, 4, 6 years and saying they're the only people that can solve these problems. But if they actually solved them, they'd be out of a job. And I think we're starting to wake up to that reality, realizing that we can't rely on those older than us to continue doing what's right and to serve our communities. That might have to fall on our shoulders as we climb into the driver's seat of American culture and politics as well.
So, Kristy, I want to flip that question on its head. What do you think older generations need to know?
I think older generations need to know that don't have time to continue relying on extractive industries, the fossil fuel industry, these industries that are destroying our planet and our communities and the environment. We need to move quickly to transition our energy systems. We need to protect communities, especially communities of color on the ground, living on the front lines of these environmental issues and pollutants and damages. And I think the older generation has the resources and the power and the political will to pass legislation and pass policy and really drive the change forward that's necessary that young people continue to demand for in the country today. And they need to start listening to us.
Isabel, turning to politics, how do you think Gen Z approaches political labels? Do you think we're seeing less political identification among that generation?
I know we are, Julia, and it's very interesting. When you look at newly registered voters, people just graduating from high school or in college, 52% of our generation is registering as politically independent, which is completely unheard of in American political history. But a lot of that has to do with wanting to support policies over blindly supporting politicians or partisan parties that we've just been expected to have our allegiance blindly subscribed to for so very long. I think you're seeing that in shifting demographics on more conservative cultural values being a high priority for Generation Z. If you look at exit polling from 2018, 2020, 2022, and we'll see in 2024, and you're starting to see almost a neck and neck support for both political parties, but it's waning substantially. I think really our generation is looking for a move beyond labels, a move beyond extreme division and partisanship, and trying to reclaim traditionalism, but in a new age way with innovation to boot.
So, Kristy, when Gen Z, members of Gen Z are looking towards leadership in our country, political leadership, I should say, is there a general discontent among that generation when it comes to the lack of bipartisanship we're seeing and, quite frankly, party bickering?
Yeah, I think we are seeing so many slowdowns when it comes to being able to get the budgets and the funding and the resources necessary to just build basic infrastructure, to get basic policy paths to protect the health and safety of our environment and our communities. And we continue to see this type of bickering and slowing down progress and the things we need to see at the rate we need to see them to address the climate crisis. And so I think this bipartisan bickering continues to reduce confidence, especially in young people, to feel like their leadership can actually get things done during their terms. So that way we can actually see progress happening on the ground in our communities.
And Isabel, we're seeing Gen Z really start to get involved in politics. They're starting to vote. The first members of Gen Z have already been elected to political office, including Congress. Do you think we can expect to see a groundswell of Gen Z candidates going forward in 2024 and beyond?
I do, but that's going to be an uphill battle. And if you look at the really leading voices from within our generation taking on those leadership opportunities, I find it really interesting. I cover this in my book that both political parties have been actively campaigning against Gen Z candidates to try to keep incumbents in office. If you look back to 2022, my friend Caroline Leavitt was running for Congress there in New Hampshire to be the youngest person ever elected, and Maxwell Frost in my current home state of Florida became the youngest person ever elected to Congress as the first Gen Zer. But both the RNC and the DNC were actively campaigning to keep the older incumbents in office, which speaks volumes to me about the culture in Washington of this wait your turn mentality that young people have been expected to be stupid, uneducated, or just unprepared to take on leadership. But the truth is, we really are losing an opportunity to share our generational perspective, and we're watching our culture be constantly regulated by those who don't even understand the world that we are continuing to grow up in and come into adulthood in. So I love seeing more cross-generational dialogue be promoted, and I hope that we see more Gen Z candidates from across the political spectrum in 2024 and beyond.
That's such an interesting point, because the question of age on both sides of the aisle is becoming a big issue here in Washington and on the campaign trail. Isabel Brown and Kristy Drutman, thank you so much. You're both very busy jet setters around this country, so we appreciate all your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then there were two. Nikki Haley has officially dropped her presidential bid, paving the way for Donald Trump to take the GOP nomination.
I am filled with the gratitude for the outpouring of support we've received from all across our great country. But the time has now come to suspend my campaign.
The presidential hopeful pushed her campaign through Super Tuesday, but with only 2 wins in Vermont and D.C., the writing was on the wall. What's next is a Biden versus Trump showdown. It's time to go on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, thanks for joining us. We all knew this time would come for Nikki Haley to drop out because of previous results. Did her performance, though, reveal any weaknesses for Trump?
I think it did. I mean, we look at, she won in Vermont, which is interesting because the polling had Trump leading in Vermont, and she actually pulled off an upset. That's kind of the underreported story of the night. Obviously, Donald Trump's still going to be the nominee, but that was a surprise upset for her. And then let's look at one county I've been looking at. It's going to be representative this fall, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. It's a suburban, urban, right outside of Charlotte County, highly educated, middle income. And this is going to be representative of some of these battleground states in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia. She did very well, and that's going to pose some problems for Donald Trump this fall, because she appears to be doing well with those moderate, independent voters, suburban voters, and we'll see if Donald Trump can take some of those back.
Yeah, you've been saying for a few weeks now that you're watching Mecklenburg County, and it could be some sort of a bellwether, I think, going into the next election. So on that note, former President Trump is going to have to fight for GOP unity and unify the voters. Are there any signs that he's going to be able to bring Haley supporters onto his side after such a, I guess, nasty and vicious primary?
Well, I think there are, and there's different types of Haley supporters, right? There's the staunch GOP supporters which I think he's going to be able to pull in the end, or at least the vast majority of them. And then in some of these open primaries, she's gotten some independents to vote for her. That the independents, by and large, are a lot more skeptical of Donald Trump. In 2016, the last time he won, he was able to win a significant amount of them. He did not win them in 2020, so we'll see what he can do now, but he's going to have some work to do there. And then Nikki Haley was able to get some Democrats, especially in these open primaries. I doubt Donald Trump's going to be able to get those, but if he's able to shore up those Republicans, as well as, get on the right side of majority on those independents, he's got a pretty good shot.
So speaking of Donald Trump polling in support, after a 3-year-long feud starting after January 6, 2021, Minority Leader in the Senate Mitch McConnell is throwing his weight behind Trump. The development came as Haley was dropping out, and even though she didn't endorse Trump, does that mean that the GOP is essentially coalescing behind Trump with this endorsement from McConnell?
It is, and I think if you're watching this closely, you were surprised. It was not a big secret that Mitch McConnell was not a huge fan of Donald Trump, especially after January 6th. And so the fact that he announced his support, as well as he's retiring at the end of the year, is a big sign of at least consolidation among GOP establishment, at least the DC GOP establishment. What it'll do for the average voter, I don't think the average voter really cares what Mitch McConnell is supporting. Even the Republican voters are not huge fans of him. But it is a sign that there is some coalescing around Donald Trump, and certainly will wrap up some donors.
Right. And you and your team were up all night, barely getting any sleep, crunching these numbers and looking at exit polling. Decision Desk got some exclusive exit polling showing key issues for both sides. 44% of Republicans voicing immigration as their number one concern. Break that number down for us.
So what was surprising on that one is, and again, these are voters who showed up and voted on Super Tuesday, which not a lot of voters do. It's still a low turnout event, even in these primaries, especially if it's contested. These voters, Republican voters, said, hey, we think immigration is even more important than the economy. And as you know, Julia, we've been polling for News Nation and The Hill for a couple of years now. Economy has been the leading thing, especially in and around inflation. To see immigration among the voters who show up, that tells you how salient it's going to be come this fall. And I think that was most surprising because it wasn't just an eke out win, number one issue. I mean, 20-30% more Republicans think immigration is going to be the issue. And you know what? It doesn't look like there's going to be a border bill. It looks like they're going to still fight about it. So immigration is going to be a thing.
So on the Democratic side, foreign policy, specifically the war in Gaza, has been a crux for the Biden administration. How are voters reacting to this, the war in Gaza, and will this eventually play a role in November?
Well, we were watching. There were a few states on the Democratic side that had the uncommitted vote, the option, very similar to Michigan, where the pro-ceasefire, pro-Gaza Democratic activists were pushing people to vote uncommitted in Michigan as instead of voting for Joe Biden to show their support for that. We were looking in places like Minnesota to see if they were able to recreate that. They got some votes, but I don't know that it's enough to really move the needle in some of these key states. We might have enough in Michigan. It's settled right around 10 or 12%. Even Rashida Tlaib came out and said, look, we need to send Joe Biden a lesson, but we're probably going to vote for him at the end or when it comes to this November. So it's a good noisemaker. It's going to create some division, but we expected at least to Joe Biden to be able to get these voters back.
So Super Tuesday wasn't just about the presidential nomination. Other key races played out. What happened in North Carolina? We've been talking a lot about Mecklenburg County, but I know there were other races playing out.
Yeah, so there's quite a few races in and around at the congressional level. There's some interesting primaries. We're still counting and trying to figure out who won the lieutenant governorship on the Republican side. North Carolina is just a good melting pot simply because it is a crossroads between the Northeast and the Southeast, and there's quite a few independent voters there. And the fact that we have a lot of close races at the House level and at some of these statewide tells us a little bit about what it's going to be like this fall. Joe Biden's trying really hard to win that state come this fall, and he might need to if he's going to lose a state like Michigan or not win a state like Georgia again.
So on the West Coast, California also had a U.S. Senate primary. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff elevated Republican Steve Garvey in that jungle primary. Is a Schiff victory all but certain in a deep blue state like California?
So as a long life California resident, and I don't live there anymore, and in the winters I wish I did. Yes, this race is over. Adam Schiff is going to win the Senate seat in California. He's just got to go through the motions for the next 6 to 7 months. If you're a political campaign junkie, you thought this was an interesting strategy because both Adam Schiff and Katie Porter, both the Democrats in this, two of the biggest Democrats in this primary, spent a lot of money to lift Steve Garvey up. Steve Garvey didn't have any money, didn't have a lot of name ID, but both Adam Schiff and Katie Porter spent a lot of money to see if he could get into second, and they wanted him in second so they could actually ensure a Democratic win this fall, and it looks like it's going to pull it off.
So in Texas, Congressman Colin Allred won the Democratic contest to take on Senator Ted Cruz, a Republican, in November. Do you think this is finally the year that Texas turns blue?
So the answer to that is no. Colin Allred is a great candidate for the Dems. He's going to be able to fundraise. He's good on the stump. He's got a little bit of name ID in the state. Ted Cruz also good name ID in the state. He knows how to fundraise. But what's interesting to me, and this might help Ted Cruz, because considering he had a pretty close race with Beto O'Rourke last time he was up, is it looks like Donald Trump is doing very well with the Hispanic vote. Looks like Donald Trump could be getting anywhere from 25 to 5% of the Hispanic vote. And if he does, he's going to have some coattails inside of Texas that's going to help Ted Cruz really seal the deal there. So no, I don't think this is the year that the Democrats take a statewide office like Ted Cruz's seat.
So we can't forget about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential candidacy. There's been speculation that he can join the Libertarian Party's presidential ticket. Do you think Haley supporters could sway towards RFK, or would this be a bigger concern for President Biden?
You know, it's interesting right now. I would say, and I've actually seen some interesting focus group material off this. Is there are a lot of Democrats who just see RFK Kennedy and they say, "Oh, it's a Kennedy. I like Kennedy. I'm going to vote for him." They don't know a lot about him. They don't know a lot about his positions, but because he's Kennedy, they associate it with the Democratic name ID. So that's right. Right now, we're seeing him take away a decent amount from Joe Biden. The same focus groups also show us once these voters figure out what he's about. Guess who he starts taking from? He starts taking from Republican voters because he has some libertarian views. He has some conservative views. And so this is a long way of me saying is he takes voters from both sides. How he portrays himself and where he's on the ballot is really going to make a difference. The most appealing thing from the libertarian side is not necessarily the policy positions, but the Libertarian Party is on the ballot in a lot of states that he's not in. So if he joins that party, his name's going to be on the ballot, and voters are going to be eligible to vote for him in many states. And yes, if he's there, he's going to take from Republicans, and he might take from Democrats simply by having that Kennedy name.
Well, he's certainly going to keep everyone on their toes. You know, I want to go back to the uncommitted topic, particularly in Minnesota. It wasn't necessarily a landslide for Biden on Super Tuesday. 45,000 uncommitted voters flooded the polls in Minnesota. Do you think progressive voters this is a sign they're speaking up? And I think you alluded to this earlier, but that doesn't seem like a small number. I mean, do you think this could have any impact on the election, judging by what happened in Minnesota?
So my base case is no. I think it's interesting. They're highly organized people, right? If you show up in Minnesota and it was raining in parts of Minnesota last night, it was cold, and yet people still showed up, you're a committed voter. So you showed all the way up not to vote for Joe Biden, but vote uncommitted because you knew that was going to make some news or at least show where you're at. So those people are highly motivated, but they're also highly educated, highly attuned voters. They understand that if we get to October and all they have is Joe Biden at the top of the ticket and Donald Trump, they may not love Joe Biden, but they know that as a Democratic voter, he represents their views better than Donald Trump. So that's why I think when the rubber meets the road, these voters are going to come home and not necessarily hurt Joe Biden. But what they will do is create a whole lot of news and a whole lot of turmoil and force Joe Biden to take some positions and address their issues along the way, which is what they want. So it's going to be a story. It's going to be difficult. But when they get in those voting booths, I don't think Joe Biden's ultimately going to lose them.
Right. Well, Scott Tranter from Decision Desk HQ, thank you so much for joining us. And please get some rest in time for the Hawaii. What is it, a primary or a caucus?
It's a primary tonight, real late. I wish I could go live, but no, I'm here in D.C.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for What's America Thinking. Come back next week and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And we want to hear from you. Leave your comments and let us know what's on your mind.